So Toyota just pulled 9 billion out of Alabama and moved the entire investment to Canada. 9 billion, the largest single foreign investment in Alabama's history, gone. 4,000 direct jobs, another 10,000 in the supply chain, gone. A factory complex that was supposed to be the economic future of Huntsville, Alabama, that had already broken ground, that had already poured foundations and ordered steel, cancelled, dismantled, relocated to Ontario. And when Alabama's governor called Tokyo to demand an explanation, the Japanese government didn't just back Toyota's decision. They issued formal guidance to every Japanese manufacturer operating in the United States, advising them to, in their words, review North American investment strategies in light of current trade uncertainties. That's the Japanese government, America's most critical ally in the Pacific, the host of 50,000 US troops, telling its corporations to get their money out of America. And then Warren Buffett, in a CNBC interview that aired 3 hours after the announcement, called the Toyota pullout the most predictable corporate decision he's seen in 30 years, and explained why every major foreign manufacturer in the United States is about to make the exact same calculation. When you hear why Toyota chose Canada over Alabama, what Japan's government actually said about the United States, and what's already happening in factories across the American South right now, you'll understand why economists are calling this the beginning of the largest foreign capital exodus from the United States since the 1970s. Hit subscribe because this affects everyone. Let me walk you through how this happened. 14 months ago, Toyota held a press conference in Huntsville that felt like a coronation. The governor was on stage, beaming. Alabama's 2 U.S. senators stood in the front row. Toyota's North American CEO flew in from Texas, and a video message from the global CEO in Toyota City, Japan, played on a massive screen behind the podium. The announcement: Toyota would build a $9 billion electric vehicle battery and assembly complex on a 700-acre site outside Huntsville. It would be the largest automotive manufacturing facility constructed in the United States in over 2 decades. Production of next-generation EV batteries and 3 new electric vehicle models, all for the North American and export markets. The numbers were staggering: 4,000 direct manufacturing jobs with an average annual salary of $58,000. Life-changing money in a region where the median household income hovers around $38,000. Another 8,000 to 12,000 indirect and supply chain jobs radiating outward. Parts suppliers, logistics companies, maintenance crews, food service, transportation, an estimated $340 million per year in new tax revenue for the state of Alabama. Money that was already being earmarked for schools, roads, hospitals, and public safety. The governor called it the single most transformational economic event in Alabama since the space program came to Huntsville in the 1960s. Construction began within months. The site was cleared. Foundations were poured for the first 3 buildings. Steel framework was rising. Alabama had committed over $400 million in state incentives, tax breaks, infrastructure improvements, workforce training programs, and Huntsville had issued $200 million in municipal bonds to finance new roads, an expanded water treatment facility, and a school expansion that was supposed to accommodate the children of thousands of incoming Toyota workers. The whole city had reorganized its future around this factory. Real estate developers broke ground on 1,500 new homes and subdivisions with names like Innovation Park and Toyota Heights. New restaurants opened. A daycare franchise signed leases for 3 new locations. An auto parts supplier from Michigan announced it was relocating its headquarters to be closer to the new Toyota complex. Huntsville wasn't just getting a factory, it was getting a future. And then on a Tuesday morning, Toyota's global CEO appeared on a live video stream from Toyota City and said 7 words that obliterated all of it. "We are relocating this investment to Ontario, Canada." The language in the official statement was careful, corporate, deliberately drained of emotion. After exhaustive review of the current trade and regulatory environment, Toyota Motor Corporation has determined that the long-term interests of our shareholders, our workforce, and our global supply chain are best served by relocating the planned North American EV manufacturing complex from Huntsville, Alabama to a site in Ontario, Canada. "We regret any inconvenience this decision may cause. Regret any inconvenience. 9 billion, 4,000 jobs, an entire city's future inconvenience. But here's the thing. And this is the part that makes this so much worse than a simple corporate betrayal. Toyota's reasons for leaving weren't petty. They weren't political. They weren't emotional. They were mathematical. And every single one traces back to the same source. Reason 1: tariff uncertainty. Trump's 25% tariffs on imported steel and aluminum had already increased Toyota's projected construction costs by over $300 million. But the current tariffs were only part of the problem. Worse, far worse, was the uncertainty about future tariffs. Toyota was planning to build vehicles in Alabama using battery components sourced from Japan, motors from Mexico, electronic systems from South Korea, and aluminum body panels from Canada. Under the current trade regime, the tariff structure on any of those components could change at any time without warning, without negotiation by executive order. A single tweet could add hundreds of millions in annual costs overnight. You cannot commit $9 billion to a 20-year facility when you don't know what it will cost to operate 12 months from now. That's not a risk any CFO on earth would sign off on. Reason 2, market access. Canada is a member of both the CPTP, the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership covering 11 Pacific nations and over 500 million consumers, and CETA, the Comprehensive Trade Agreement with the European Union. A vehicle manufactured in Ontario can be exported tariff-free to Japan, Australia, Vietnam, Singapore, the EU, the UK, Mexico, Chile, and dozens of other markets. A vehicle built in Alabama cannot access any of those markets on preferential terms. The United States withdrew from TPP and has no comparable multilateral trade agreements in place. Building in Alabama means building exclusively for the American domestic market. Building in Ontario means building for the world. For a global manufacturer like Toyota, that's not even a close call. Reason 3, energy costs. Ontario's electricity grid runs primarily on hydroelectric and nuclear power, clean, cheap, and stable. Industrial electricity rates in Ontario average approximately 6 cents per kilowatt hour, compared to roughly 10 cents in Alabama, which relies heavily on natural gas and coal-fired generation. For a facility running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week with massive energy demands for battery production, that 40% energy cost differential represents savings of over $1 billion across a 20-year facility. Lifespan. Reason 4, workforce pipeline. Canada's points-based immigration system is specifically designed to attract skilled manufacturing and technical workers from around the world. Toyota can project workforce availability in Ontario for the next 2 decades with reasonable confidence. Alabama's workforce, while skilled and genuinely motivated, is constrained by a national immigration policy that has been made deliberately hostile to the very skilled workers that advanced EV battery manufacturing requires: engineers, technicians, specialists in battery chemistry and robotics. And reason 5, the one Toyota's executives emphasized in private conversations, but carefully left out of the press release: policy stability. Canada's trade agreements are binding, bipartisan, institutionally protected, and backstopped by the rule of law. They don't change with every election cycle. They don't get torn up by executive order. They don't evaporate because of a late-night social media post. A company that builds a $9 billion factory in Canada today can be reasonably, rationally confident that the rules governing that factory will still be in place in 2035, in 2040. No corporate planner in the world can say that about the United States. Not anymore. An internal Toyota strategy memo leaked to the NIC Financial newspaper and subsequently confirmed by 2 sources inside Toyota's North American division stated it with brutal corporate clarity. The current U.S. trade environment makes long-term capital allocation to American manufacturing facilities an unacceptable risk. Policy volatility, tariff unpredictability, and the absence of binding multilateral trade agreements render the investment thesis for greenfield U.S. manufacturing fundamentally unsound. Unacceptable risk fundamentally unsound. That's what one of the world's largest and most respected manufacturers thinks about building things in America right now. Toyota didn't leave because Canada bribed them with incentives. Canada did offer a $1.5 billion incentive package, but Alabama's package was comparable. The incentives weren't the deciding factor. The deciding factor was that the United States of America has become too unpredictable, too volatile, and too dangerous to invest $9 billion in. And the people paying the price for that aren't in Tokyo boardrooms or Ottawa policy offices. They're in Huntsville, Alabama. 600 construction workers were laid off within a week of the announcement. Men and women who had been pouring concrete and welding steel for months, who had signed leases on apartments in Huntsville, who had enrolled their children in Huntsville schools, who had started putting down roots in a city they were told would be their home for decades, showed up to the job site on a Wednesday morning and were told to go home. Security guards stood at the gate. The cranes were still the half-built steel skeleton of what was supposed to be building one, stood against the Alabama sky like a monument to a promise that nobody kept. A steel worker named Marcus Delgado, who had relocated his family of 4 from Chattanooga specifically for the Toyota project, told a local news crew outside the locked construction gate, "I sold my house. I moved my kids out of their school. I moved my wife away from her mother. I did everything right. I did exactly what they told me to do. And now I'm standing in a parking lot with no job, no house to go back to, and no way to pay my rent next month." His daughter standing beside him was 9 years old. The workers already hired into Toyota's pre-production training program. 240 people carefully selected from over 3,000 applicants, many of them single parents, many of them people who had spent their entire working lives earning less than $15 an hour and who saw this program as the first real opportunity they'd ever been offered, received form letters, identical impersonal corporate form letters, thanking them for their interest and informing them that the training program has been discontinued effective immediately. No severance, no transition assistance, no referrals, just a letter. A woman named Kesha Bowman, 29 years old, a single mother of two, who had been accepted into the battery assembly training track and who had already arranged childcare, purchased steel-toed boots and told her children that mama was going to have a real career now, posted a video on social media that went viral across Alabama and eventually across the country. They told me this was going to change my life, she said, sitting in her car in the parking lot, her voice steady but her eyes red and swollen. They told me this was my shot. I believed them. I told my kids and now it's just nothing. I don't know what I'm supposed to do now. I really don't. These aren't statistics. These are people who reorganized their entire lives around a promise that evaporated because of policy decisions made 1,000 miles away by people who will never learn their names and will never face the consequences of what they've done. And it wasn't just the workers. The devastation radiating outward from Toyota's decision is hitting every layer of Huntsville's economy, simultaneously like an earthquake with aftershocks that keep getting stronger. The $200 million in municipal bonds that Huntsville issued to finance Toyota-related infrastructure, the new interchange on I-565, the expanded water treatment plant, the widened access roads, the fiber optic network that was supposed to serve the factory complex. All of that was built, the concrete is poured, the pipes are in the ground, the bills are due, but the factory that was supposed to generate the tax revenue to pay for all of it doesn't exist. Huntsville taxpayers will be paying off infrastructure built for a ghost factory for the next 25 years. The 1,500 homes under construction in new subdivisions, developments with optimistic names like Innovation Park and Toyota Heights that suddenly sound like cruel jokes are frozen mid-construction. Framed walls standing open to the weather, driveways poured leading to nothing. Developers who took out construction loans based on projected demand that vanished overnight are facing bankruptcy. Families who put down deposits of $20,000 and $30,000 on homes that will never be completed are trying to recover money from builders who don't have it. The small businesses are the quietest casualties. A couple who opened a barbecue restaurant 6 months ago specifically to serve the lunch crowd from the Toyota site have already closed. A woman who invested her retirement savings into a daycare franchise banking on hundreds of young Toyota families moving into the area is trying to sell equipment she bought 3 months ago at a loss. An auto parts retailer, a physical therapy clinic, a tutoring center, a CrossFit gym, all opened in anticipation of a population boom that will never arrive. Some have closed, others are weeks from closing. Each one represents a family that bet everything on a future that someone in Washington decided wasn't worth protecting. The governor held a press conference 2 days after the announcement. She was visibly emotional, her voice cracking at several points, her hands gripping the edges of the podium. She didn't blame Toyota. She said she understood the business logic. She'd read the same numbers everyone else had. Instead, she directed her anger squarely and unambiguously at Washington. Alabama did everything right, she said. We offered competitive incentives. We trained workers. We built infrastructure. We bent over backward to make this work. We held up our end of every single commitment we made. And we lost this investment not because of anything Alabama did or failed to do, but because of trade policies imposed by the federal government that made it impossible for Toyota to justify staying here. She paused, took a breath, and said something that made national news within minutes. I'm a Republican, I voted for the president, I campaigned for the president, and I'm telling you, as the governor of this state, this policy is destroying Alabama. Think about that for a moment. A Republican governor in one of the reddest states in America standing in front of cameras with tears in her eyes, publicly blaming a Republican president for the economic devastation of her state. That's how catastrophic this is. That's how deep the damage goes. And then Warren Buffett, with the timing and precision that has defined his career for 7 decades, explained exactly why it happened and why Huntsville is just the beginning. Buffett was on CNBC seated in his usual chair in Omaha, cherry Coke on the desk when the anchor asked him about the Toyota decision. He didn't hesitate. Capital is a coward, Buffett said. It always has been. It always will be. Capital doesn't care about flags or patriotism or campaign promises or press conferences. It doesn't vote. It doesn't have feelings. It goes where the rules are clear, the policies are stable, and the math works. That's not cynicism. That's physics. And right now, the math doesn't work in the United States. Toyota just proved it. But they didn't discover anything new. They just said out loud what every CFO at every major foreign manufacturer has been saying privately for the last 18 months. He leaned back. When you're making a $9 billion investment, you're not thinking about next quarter. You're thinking about the next 20 years. You need to know the tariff structure won't change in 6 months because of a tweet. You need to know your supply chain won't be disrupted by an executive order. You need to know the country you're building in will still honor its trade agreements a decade from now. Canada can promise all of that. The United States right now cannot promise any of it. Then Buffett said something that landed like a hammer on every factory town in America. Alabama didn't do anything wrong. Alabama offered great incentives. Alabama trained workers. Alabama built roads and water systems and schools. Alabama did everything right, and they still lost because no state incentive package in the world can overcome federal policy chaos. You can't out-incentivize uncertainty. You cannot bribe a corporation into ignoring risk. The risk is the policy, and the policy is the problem. He paused, adjusted his glasses, and delivered the line that sent tremors through every boardroom, every governor's office, and every economic development agency in the industrial South. Toyota is not the last, they're the first, they're the canary in the coal mine. Except this canary didn't just stop singing, it packed its bags and moved to Canada. Every major foreign manufacturer with significant US operations is running the exact same spreadsheet Toyota ran right now as we speak. And that spreadsheet is going to tell them the same thing it told Toyota. Build somewhere predictable, build somewhere stable, build somewhere the rules don't change because someone had a bad morning, build somewhere you can trust. And right now, for the first time in my 70 years of investing, for the first time in my lifetime, that place is not the United States of America. When Buffett says capital is leaving, he's not speculating, he's not editorializing, he's describing what he's seeing inside his own portfolio. He confirmed that several Berkshire Hathaway companies are actively reviewing their North American manufacturing footprint. Language that in the Buffett universe means decisions have already been made and announcements are imminent. But the Toyota decision didn't happen in a vacuum. And this is where the story escalates from devastating to terrifying. It happened in the context of a seismic, deliberate shift in Japan's posture toward the United States. A shift that transforms this from a corporate relocation story into a geopolitical crisis with implications that will be felt for decades. Within 24 hours of Toyota's announcement, Japan's Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry, known as METI, the single most powerful economic policy body in the Japanese government, the institution that has guided Japan's industrial strategy since the post-war reconstruction, issued a formal public statement that stopped the diplomatic world in its tracks. The Japanese government respects and supports the sovereign decisions of Japanese corporations to allocate capital and manufacturing capacity to jurisdictions that offer long-term policy stability, predictable regulatory environments, and reliable trade frameworks. That sentence alone was extraordinary. But then came the unprecedented part. METI issued formal advisory guidance, not a suggestion, not a recommendation, a formal advisory to all Japanese manufacturers with operations in the United States, recommending that they comprehensively review North American investment strategies in light of current trade uncertainties, tariff volatility, and the absence of binding multilateral trade agreements involving the United States. Let that sink in. The Japanese government, America's most important strategic ally in Asia, the anchor of the entire U.S. security architecture in the Pacific, the host of 50,000 American military personnel, a nation that has been America's most reliable and most loyal economic partner for the better part of 4 decades, just told its corporations officially, formally on the public record, to reconsider whether the United States is a safe place to put their money. That is not a corporate decision by a single company. That is a sovereign judgment by an allied nation. Japan looked at the United States of America, assessed the investment environment, and concluded as a matter of official national economic policy that America can no longer be trusted, and they're backing that judgment with concrete action. Japan and Canada are both core members of the CPTP, the 11-nation Trans-Pacific Trade Partnership that Donald Trump withdrew the United States from on his 3rd day in office, a decision that handed the economic leadership of the Pacific to Japan and that is now paying dividends Canada's way. Japan-Canada bilateral investment flows have surged 37% in the last 18 months alone. Honda, which operates major manufacturing facilities in Ohio, Indiana, and North Carolina, employing over 25,000 American workers, is reportedly in advanced discussions to relocate a planned $4 billion EV plant expansion from Marysville, Ohio, to a greenfield site outside London, Ontario. Nissan has formally paused a $2 billion investment commitment in Smyrna, Tennessee, pending what the company calls a comprehensive policy environment review. Subaru has initiated what internal documents describe as a full-spectrum risk assessment of its Lafayette, Indiana manufacturing operations. Toyota was the first. Honda appears to be next. And behind Honda, a line of Japanese manufacturers stretching back to Tokyo. Each one running the same spreadsheet, each one arriving at the same answer. And it's not just Japan. The Exodus signal is being received and acted upon across every major manufacturing economy on Earth. Volkswagen has formally paused a $2 billion factory expansion in Chattanooga, Tennessee, a facility that was supposed to produce the company's next-generation electric SUV for the North American market. BMW is reviewing the long-term investment timeline for its Spartanburg, South Carolina plant, the single largest BMW manufacturing facility anywhere in the world. A plant that employs over 11,000 people, that has been the crown jewel of South Carolina's economy for 3 decades, and that exports more vehicles from the United States than any other auto plant in the country. If BMW scales back Spartanburg, the economic shockwave would be felt from Greenville to Columbia. Siemens Energy has delayed its commitment to build a new turbine manufacturing facility in Houston, Texas, citing policy environment concerns. Hyundai, which announced a massive $7 billion EV factory in Bryan County, Georgia, just 2 years ago to enormous fanfare, has reportedly begun what sources describe as parallel planning for a Canadian alternative facility, meaning they're keeping Georgia as an option while simultaneously designing a plant in Ontario that could absorb the investment if conditions don't stabilize. The European Commission, with its characteristic bureaucratic understatement, issued guidance strikingly similar to Japan's media advisory, recommending that EU-based manufacturers conduct thorough and updated risk assessments before committing or expanding capital investment in jurisdictions experiencing significant trade policy volatility. In Brussels, they don't name specific countries in these advisories. They don't have to. Everyone knows which jurisdiction they're talking about. These aren't coincidences. This isn't a handful of corporations making isolated decisions for idiosyncratic reasons. This is coordinated, rational, mathematically driven capital flight on a scale the United States has not experienced since the oil crisis and stagflation of the 1970s. This is what happens when the world's largest economy becomes the world's least predictable economy, when the country that built the post-war manufacturing order decides through its own policy choices to make that order uninhabitable. The numbers are sobering. The combined foreign manufacturing investment currently categorized as under review, paused, deferred, or an active relocation from the United States, according to a tracking analysis by the Rhodium Group, is estimated at between 47 and 62 billion. That's not over a decade. That's right now. The direct manufacturing jobs attached to those investments, jobs that pay $50, $60, $70,000 a year in communities where that kind of money is transformational, number between 85,000 and 120,000. When you add the indirect and induced employment effects, the supply chain workers, the service workers, the teachers and nurses and small business owners whose livelihoods depend on those factories, the total employment at risk exceeds 300,000. And here is the detail that should make every political operative in Washington choke on their coffee. Every single one of those factories, every single one of those investments, every single one of those communities is in a Republican-held state: Alabama, Ohio, Tennessee, South Carolina, Texas, Georgia, Indiana, Kentucky. The map of foreign manufacturing investment at risk in the United States is almost perfectly the map of the Republican electoral coalition. Think about the irony. Trump's trade policy isn't destroying Silicon Valley or Wall Street or the coastal tech economy. It's gutting the industrial South and the manufacturing Midwest. The very communities that elected him, the very workers who believed him when he stood at podiums and promised that his trade policies would bring factories flooding back to America. The factories are indeed flooding. They're flooding out. For decades, the American South built its entire economic identity, its pitch to the world, on attracting foreign manufacturers, low corporate taxes, right-to-work labor laws, generous, sometimes extravagant incentive packages, cheap land, business, friendly regulation, proximity to ports and interstate highways, and it worked brilliantly. BMW came to South Carolina in 1992 and built the most productive luxury car factory on earth. Mercedes came to Alabama in 1993 and brought thousands of jobs to a state that desperately needed them. Volkswagen came to Tennessee, Hyundai came to Georgia, Toyota, Honda, Nissan, Subaru, scattered across a dozen southern and midwestern states. This model, the Southern Foreign Manufacturing Model, transformed the region's economy from agriculture, extraction, and poverty into advanced manufacturing, middle-class employment, and real tangible prosperity. It funded schools, it built hospitals, it created a tax base that allowed communities to invest in their own futures for the first time in generations. And now it's unraveling. Not because the South did anything wrong, not because Southern workers aren't skilled or hardworking or capable of building world-class vehicles and components. Not because Southern governors and economic development officials aren't competitive or creative or aggressive in their recruitment efforts. It's unraveling because Washington made the South's biggest selling point: reliable access to the American market, stable integration with global trade networks, and the certainty that the rules wouldn't change overnight, worthless. The moment that selling point disappeared, the factories started looking for somewhere that could still offer it. The factories aren't disappearing from the face of the earth. They're not going to China. They're not being automated out of existence. They're moving to Ontario and Quebec and northern Mexico. They're moving across a border that used to be invisible to commerce, and that is now, thanks to tariff walls and policy chaos, a barrier that capital can see from outer space. The American South is on the verge of experiencing what the industrial Midwest experienced in the 1970s and 1980s. And if you've ever driven through Youngstown, Ohio, or Flint, Michigan, or Gary, Indiana, you know what that looks like. Factory closures, boarded up main streets, population decline as young people leave for cities that still have opportunity, tax-based erosion that forces cuts to schools, police, hospitals, generational poverty that becomes self-reinforcing, that traps families and communities with no jobs, no prospects, and no way out. And just like the Midwest, the people who will suffer the most, the people who will bear the heaviest cost of this catastrophe, will be the ones who were promised loudly, confidently, and repeatedly that it would never ever happen to them. So here's where we are. Toyota pulled $9 billion out of Alabama and moved it to Canada, the largest single foreign investment withdrawal from the United States in modern history. 4,000 direct jobs gone, 10,000 supply chain jobs gone, an entire city's future. The roads, the schools, the homes, the small businesses, the municipal bonds that will take 25 years to pay off, built for a factory that no longer exists. Japan's government backed the decision and formally advised every Japanese manufacturer in America to reconsider their investments. Warren Buffett called capital a coward, said the math no longer works in the United States, and warned that Toyota isn't the last, they're the first. And he's right. Factories across the American South and Midwest, BMW, Volkswagen, Honda, Hyundai, Nissan, Siemens, are freezing expansions, pausing commitments, reviewing timelines, and running relocation analyses that all point in the same direction, north. The combined investment at risk exceeds $60 billion. The jobs at risk number in the hundreds of thousands. And the communities left behind. Communities like Huntsville. Communities that did everything right, that trained the workers and built the roads and issued the bonds and believed the promises, are staring down a future that looks a lot like Flint, Michigan in 1985. This isn't about Toyota. This isn't about one factory in one state or one corporation spreadsheet. This is about whether the United States of America is still a place where the world wants to build things, where capital wants to land, where manufacturers want to invest, where workers can count on the factory still being there when their children are old enough to work in it. And right now, the world is answering that question. Not with speeches or press releases or diplomatic cables, with moving trucks, with shipping containers, with construction cranes being dismantled in Alabama and reassembled in Ontario. Will any of these factories come back? Or once capital leaves, does it stay gone? Will the workers in Huntsville and in factory towns like it across the American South ever recover what they've just lost? Or will they join the long, quiet procession of American communities that were promised prosperity and delivered poverty? And will the voters who were promised a manufacturing renaissance, who were told over and over that tough trade policies would bring factories flooding back to America, hold accountable the man whose policies drove those factories out? The factories are moving, the jobs are leaving, the cranes are coming down, and the only people who don't seem to know it are the ones who caused it. Keep watching.